What's going on, guys? Nathan here, back again with another Commander video. Today is a very special video because we are going through and tier listing all of the land acceleration options within Mono Blue. That's right, we're taking a look at a total of 69 nice options for Mono Blue to accelerate more lands. So generally, we are not going to be looking at artifact ramp, we are not going to be considering mana dorks, and we are not going to be considering land cyclers, so options like Lorien Revealed, which can cycle to draw you a land. Although those cards are good and you should run those, we're going to be paying attention to specific effects that allow you to either ramp out more lands or allow you to ramp out more mana on your lands. So before we get into the individual card discussions, I'd just like to ask, if you enjoy this video, please leave a like on it and subscribe to stay tuned for all of the free Commander content that I produce on my channel. I'd appreciate it a ton. And this week's comment of the week is brought to us by Paul Scarecrow 1779, commenting on my Conclave Mentor Selesnya +1/+1 counters PEDH deck, recommending a couple of card draw options such as In the Presence of Ages, Crows and Tusker, and Druidic Ritual, which I appreciate very much. I love it when you guys recommend all kinds of cards that I may have missed in my deck techs, just so that we can continue to make those decks better. So I really appreciate that. We want to talk about the tier listing as well. So S is going to be your quote-unquote auto-includes within the tier list here. So S for Slam It, you're just going to slam it in most of your blue decks. A is going to be pretty amazing in most or many decks. So this is going to be not quite S level, not an auto-include, but a pretty good consideration that you might want to pay attention to. Then we have B, which is our mid-tier, standing for kind of mid, to be honest. And then we have C, which is going to be our cuttable tier. You probably want to cut these scuffed, chaffed cards. And this is going to be pretty much anything that you're really desperate for. If you're really reaching towards the bottom of the barrel, that's where this is going to go. And then finally, we have a special category, which I'm going to call Sea Sailor, which I think is appropriate for Mono Blue. That stands for card is excellent, but scuffed as land ramp. So anything that might be great that you would run in your deck anyway and can also be considered incidental land ramp. All right, and then finally, we need to get I apologize for having such rude clothing on today. We are not doing a mono green video, we're doing a mono blue video, and so we need to get into something a little bit more appropriate. There we go. We're going to show off that nice mono blue Theros basic island background, which I actually have. I actually bought a bunch of these, my favorite full art basic lands. All right, so now we can get into the card discussions. And you'll notice as I go through these that I'm going to be looking at my left monitor quite a bit. That is because I have the full cards up on that monitor given on this tier list. They are very hard to read. Starting us off, we have Ancient Tomb, which is basically fast mana, to be honest. This is a little bit, again, sort of against my own rules, a little bit of a cheatsy doodle right away on the rules, but Ancient Tomb is just honestly the best land ramp acceleration that you can run. If you're willing to pay the hefty price tag of about $100, then it is a land you always want to be slamming in your decks, and this definitely needs to be considered fast ramp by the community, although it isn't for some reason, but that is going to go straight into our S category. Next, we have Temple of the False God. Now, Temple of the False God is going to be the same ability, but we can only activate it if you control 5 or more lands. Now, Tomer from MTG Goldfish made a video explaining the math of the success rate of operating Temple of the False God by turn 5, and if you have a 42 land deck, so that'd be Temple of the False God plus 41 other lands, you have an 85% success rate to play and activate the Temple of the False God on turn 5. Now, if you are running less lands than that, which most Commander decks are, I believe, then that percentage falls off. And I would say if you are below 80% odds to hit it by turn 5, so if you're running a 36 land deck, I believe that falls to about 75% based on the math from that particular video, then I would probably not run Temple. So it really depends on your land count. And also I will say Temple continues to fall as time goes on with the advent of more MDFCs, which are not lands on the front side, and also the land cyclers, so your cards like Lorien Revealed and other cyclers creatures that can cycle for lands, or rather tutor for lands, those are more and more common in decks these days. And so I would say that you need to be running strict lands, and I would say at least 40 of them to put Temple of the False God into your deck. And also I will say, as a general rule, I think that as time goes on, the extra bit of mana that you add on turn 5, for example, is not as valuable as the mana that you're adding on turns 1, 2, or 3, because you can't use that repeatable source of mana for multiple turns throughout the game. Essentially, you are on a limited clock to use that particular mana, and so that incremental mana means less. And so I think for that reason, Temple of the False God has to go into our cuttable category. It is just not deserving to be in most decks unless you are a dedicated landfall deck. Next, we have Explorer Scope. Explorer Scope is a 1-mana artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped, and it equips for 1. Now, I love Explorer Scope, and I think that generally it is underrated because it is so efficient. You can pay in installments of 1. Now, I will say if you're running 38 lands in your deck, you have a chance to hit off of that attack trigger to actually put a land in a play between 2 and 3 times on average is going to take you to get that hit. So I look at it almost as a rampant growth that you can pay in installments, and it's going to be delayed by about 2 turns. So if you slam this on turn 1, or maybe even turn 2, because most people play a tapped land on turn 1. So if you slam this on turn 2, and then you probably need a creature out, so it's not until turn 3 that you equip it, and then you would have to swing either on turn 3 or turn 4, and then it's going to take about 2 turns to hit a land off of that. So it's really, you actually only get the land starting on about turn 4 or turn 5 on average. And so for that reason, it's not amazing, but given the fact that it only costs you colorless mana and it can be paid in installments, and it's just very, very efficient for what it does, I think it does, you know, get points there. And if you care at all about artifacts on the battlefield or equipment, then I think this is pretty decent. And so I think it goes into the B category. Also, it can get non-basics, right? It's just going to look at the top card of your library. So also, if you have Top-Deck Manipulation, it's great there. So I think Explorer Scope maybe is probably a top of B, but we'll reevaluate that at the end of the tier list. Next, we have Retraced Image, which is a 1-mana sorcery. Reveal a card in your hand, then put that card into play if it has the same name as a permanent in play. Now, the assumption here is that you have an island in play, and so it is essentially a 1-mana sorcery that reads, you may play an extra land this turn. Now, I think that's decent, and I think that this is probably better run if you have a lot of card draw in your hand, because I don't think that this particular effect is really worth a whole card. For example, I'd rather pay a 2-mana draw 2 in this slot instead, but we are, of course, evaluating land ramp options, not card draw options. So if you treat this as a 1-mana you may play an extra land this turn, and you are running a bunch of islands, I suppose it is playable, and I'm thinking probably towards the bottom of B, although I don't run this in any particular decks. But a mono blue landfall deck would definitely want this. I think it's just that you need to have a ton of islands, and I do not like running a lot of basics in my decks because there's just too much utility to be had in 2024 Commander, even on a budget. And so I think this goes probably bottom of B, or maybe top of C, but I'm thinking bottom of B for now because it does not, that card disadvantage just feels bad, I think, and so it gets points taken off for that. Next, we have a little bit of a cheatsy doodle here against my own rules. We have the Mycosynth Gardens, which is a land, and I'm going to just read the part that matters here. You can pay X and tap it to have the Mycosynth Garden become the copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value X. So I think in Magical Christmas Land, the best case scenario for this is that you pay 1 to make it a copy of Sol Ring, and now you essentially have an Ancient Tomb that is targetable as an artifact. So I think that the Mycosynth Garden, if you are in an artifact deck, you simply play this card because you're going to have a lot of mana at your disposal. I think that, you know, while it is not necessarily mana acceleration because you're probably only going to be running Soul Ring, which it can copy, and then that's pretty much it in order to get more than one mana produced off of this land. I think it can go in, card is excellent but scuffed as land ramp, but I just wanted to mention that because technically it is a card that can accelerate you if you happen to have a Soul Ring on the battlefield. Next we have a format stable Wayfarer's Bauble, 1 mana artifact. You can pay 2 and sack it to ramp out a land card. I think this simply goes into either S or A because it is essentially a 3 mana ramp and growth, which I think is going to be the sort of standard for what we can get as a standard rate within mono blue. Again, green really accelerates at the land ramp efficiency, and so we need to take what we get in the mono blue colors, and so for that reason it's going in the bottom of A for now. Next we have Adric, Mathematical Genius, 2 mana 1/1 human artificer. You can pay 3 and tap him to copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, and you can pay 2 and sack him to counter target activated or triggered ability. Now, why is Adric in a land ramp video? The reason is you can copy fetch land triggers. So you got a Polluted Delta on the battlefield, you're going to sack it, you tap 3, tap Adric, and then you can copy that trigger to ramp out another land. And of course, there is that extra ability to stifle something. So the fact that technically Adric can ramp you is really why he's on this list. Is it inefficient? Absolutely not. And so into the C category it goes. We'll put him perhaps top of C because also considering he costs a total of 5 mana to ramp out 1 land is not good. But it is quite a funny card, and technically it does work as land ramp, ladies and gentlemen. You need to be running a ton of fetch lands, so all of the Evolving Wilds, the Escape Tunnels, you know, all of the uncolored fetch lands to make this worth it. But even then, it is pretty much a C because it's very situational and inefficient at the same time. Next, we have Azor's Gateway, which is a 2 mana legendary artifact. You can pay 1 and tap to draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. If cards with 5 or more different converted mana costs are exiled with Azor's Gateway, you gain 5 life, untap it, and then transform it. And it transforms into Sanctum of the Sun, which is a legendary land. You can tap it to add X mana of any 1 color to your mana pool, where X is your life total. Ladies and gentlemen, we can pay 3 mana and I guess put 5 cards from our hand under this thing. It is card selection. It is definitely not card draw, just because we have to exile those cards, and if Azor's Gateway is blown up at any point in time, boy are you big sad for that. The land itself is actually pretty amazing in terms of how much mana it can produce, but you are never going to be able to transform this thing. It is way too situational, and I think this goes straight into the bottom of C because we are never going to be able to activate that ability, although it is quite a neat effect and a neat design in my personal opinion. Next we have a Richard special, Richard from MTG Goldfish, Dowsing Dagger, 2 mana artifact equipment. When it enters, target opponent creates 2/2 green plant creature tokens with Defender, equipped creature gets ++1, and most importantly, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may transform Dowsing Dagger, and equips for 2, and that transforms into a land that taps for 3 mana. Dowsing Dagger is an absolute S tier in my personal opinion, because most often in blue you have very evasive creatures, you have unblockables, you have flyers, and really this is better than a Thran Dynamo, and Thran Dynamo is a very good card held in very high esteem within the community because you can essentially pay 4 mana to then get 3 mana right back, so you're only costing yourself 1 mana total the turn that it comes down, assuming that you can use the 3 mana that it can be produced. And Dowsing Dagger you can also pay in installments, and you can curry some political favor with the 0/2 plant if somebody needs blockers. So I think Dowsing Dagger, because that land is so much less targetable than something like a Thran Dynamo, it is absolutely awesome. And so this goes below Ancient Tomb on the S tier, and I believe that more decks, I think almost every deck could probably run this, assuming that you have any sort of small creatures or evasive creatures creatures. I mean, even like a mana dork, right? You would be able to swing in, assuming that you know that your opponents won't block if they have their commander on the board or you're holding a mana or something. I think that you can just get in as long as you can telegraph whether your opponent will block or not, to then generate yourself a buttload of mana with Dowsing Dagger. Very good card. Next, we have Dreamscape Artist, 2-mana creature, human spell shaper, 1/1 power and toughness. We can pay 3, tap it, discard a card, sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield untapped, I might note, and then shuffle. So Dreamscape Artist is quite interesting. I think that this is probably in the B category, maybe top of B, because if you care at all about putting things into the graveyard, discarding cards, if you're in an Arami or perhaps an Emery deck, you just care at all about your graveyard, you'll probably want this as a source of land ramp. Is it efficient? No. You are paying 5 mana to ramp for essentially a net. Well, actually, it would be a net 2 lands because technically you can sack the land that you tapped to activate the ability. So if you look at it instead as 4 mana, tutor out 1 land because you would pay the 2 for the creature and then 2 on the ability activation. Assuming that you then sack the tapped land, that would knock 1 off of the cost of the ability. And so I think that is honestly not bad. I don't know why this doesn't see more play. Maybe I should run this in my PEDH decks because it is at the common rarity as well. I mean, obviously it is slow for a power level 7 or power level 8 type of deck, but if you were in like a precon or like battlecruiser type of Magic setting, I think this is actually pretty decent. And so I think that you probably want to be in a discard deck for it to be truly worth it, but I think in a vacuum, this is probably going to be at like middle of B, I'm going to say. We'll put it at the mid-tier level for Dreamscape Artist. Next, we have Hithlain Rope, 2-mana artifact. It can't be sacrificed. 1 mana, tap, search your library for basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. The player to your right gains control of Hithlain Rope, and you can also pay 2, tap, draw a card. The player to your right gains control of Hithlain Rope. This is never going to make it back to you. I do not think that this is worth it at all. You are paying, okay, it's good that you pay 3 mana to ramp out a basic, right? But if you then look at it as 3 mana, you get a basic, but all of your other opponents get a basic as well, that is absolutely terrible, and that is giving your opponents way too many resources. And so this will go right almost at the bottom of C. Actually, no, that's definitely bottom of C because we don't want to be giving out any resources to our opponents in a mono blue deck, and so into the cuttable category it goes. Next, we have Reshape, 2 mana, an X, sorcery. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sack an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. The reason why this is in the list is because we can grab artifact lands out of our deck, and so we only need to pay 2 mana for this effect. Now, we do need to sack an artifact, and that's the primary problem, so we have to assume that we're going to have some sort of junk laying around, preferably a food token. In fact, I think that a clue is probably best kept perhaps for card draw. I guess depending on what you need at that particular point in the game, you might trade the clue for extra land ramp, which is totally understandable. And would you sack a treasure for this? Probably, I think, because then it would be 3 mana total to ramp out a artifact land, which could possibly be targeted by your opponents because it is of the artifact type. But if it is one of the bridges and it's indestructible, or if it's one of the untapped indestructible lands, I think that's still worth it. So I think this is actually an A, honestly, probably like bottom of A. I think this probably should be played in more decks. A lot of mono blue decks care about artifacts and just have little things to sack, and so I think this goes right into those in a ramp slot, and it can also be used to tutor out just any artifact if you don't need to use it for a land. So honestly, it's just a great card in both as a ramp spell and as a regular spell, and that's why it doesn't go into the Sea Sailor category because it's excellent even as a ramp spell. Next, we have Scorched Ruin, which is a land, and you'll notice as we go through here, we're going through order of mana cost, and this I'm putting in the 2 CMC portion of the mana cost curve here because when it comes into play, we have to sack 2 untapped lands, thus it costs us 2 mana. But the payoff here is that you can tap to add 4 colorless mana to your mana pool, so ultimately you are paying 2 mana on the turn that you play it to then generate 2 additional mana. So if you think about it as sort of like an ancient tomb that you have to wait to use, I think that this isn't bad if you're running any sort of catch-up ramp package. If you happen to be running white, this is decent. I think that, honestly, I almost never see this card played, but I think it probably deserves to be played a little bit more. The more that I look at this, I think you probably need to have a lot of colorless cost in your deck, so you have to be, again, in sort of an artifact or maybe even an Eldrazi ramp style of deck where you can actually spend the colorless mana on various things, or I guess if you care about putting lands into your graveyard, then it's not bad. So I did just check, and this is a $71 card at the moment, so that would make sense why it's not played that much, but I think that this is actually pretty decent, and in any sort of land reanimator style of deck, I think this is actually not that bad. So I'm going to put this actually in either top of B or bottom of A. I think it definitely beats out Explorer Scope, but probably not quite as good as Reshape, although technically I guess Reshape you would cast for 2 and you can use a land immediately. So I think it's top of B. We're going to put it, and we're going to move on in the interest of time. And so next we have Search for Azcanta. So this is a 2-mana legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put it into your graveyard. Then you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. You may transform it, and it transforms into a land that taps for blue, and you can pay 3, tap it, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And so this is going to be card advantage on a land, but I think it's still pretty inefficient for paying what is essentially the equivalent of 4 mana to do that. So the question is, how fast can we actually transform Search for Azcanta, because we need to have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, which I think is pretty trivial in a self-mill style of deck. And so if you slam this on turn 2, let's say, how many more turns would it take to get 7 or more cards in your graveyard? And assuming that you trigger your turn 3, you're going to put a card into your graveyard. You then have to mill 6 more cards, which I think is possible probably by turn 3 or turn 4. So I would look at this as flipping to a land on either turn 4 or turn 5 on average, which is pretty slow, but it is, you know, I would say in a self-mill deck, this can probably pretty reliably be land ramp for you. It's just a ramp later in the game. So I think this probably goes towards the middle of B, under Explorer Scope, because I think Explorer Scope is going to be probably a little bit quicker. So I think we're going to go right below Explorer Scope, because I think it's just a little bit slower than Explorer Scope, and Explorer Scope has the chance to hit on the first actual flip, and plus Explorer Scope you can pay in increments of 1, where Search for Azcanta is always going to cost 2, but I think that it's in the mix for some decent options for land ramp within blue. Next, we have Surveyor's Scope. Now, this is a 2-mana artifact. You can tap and exile it. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of players who control at least 2 more lands than you. Put those cards onto the battlefield untapped, I will add, and then shuffle. So this was recently pitched by Richard from MTG Goldfish on their Shark Tank episode. I'll show that on the screen here. And he has some interesting math as to why this is a decent source of land ramp. Now, I think that this is incredibly solid. You always assume that there's probably going to be some sort of ramp style of deck going on at the table. So somebody's probably playing green, and green just ramps out lands. That's just what they do. So if you assume that one of your opponents is always going to be that land rampy deck, then you would have to be 2 lands behind in order to activate the Surveyor's Scope. So if you actually hold out playing lands, you could potentially get 6 land drops in 1 turn off of this for costing only 2 mana. Which is an interesting preposition, right? Because you take this massive hit in tempo, but you do actually get a giant burst of mana later on in the game. And so I've been really intrigued in running this card, and I think this is very, very good in any deck that you're running with a catch-up ramp package, like in white, if you're running Lotus Fields or Scorched Ruins, you know, like we just talked about, then this is a natural shoo-in because you're already going to be down on lands. And if you're already running like a bunch of bounce lands, then that would be even better. And I think what you can do, what I saw somebody mention on that video too, is if you have the Surveyor's Scope and you have a bunch of fetch lands, if you then crack the fetch lands and you all respawn, so So if you crack all the fetch lands, right, on the stack, and then you respond to all of those cracks by tapping and activating the Surveyor's Scope, technically those lands are not on the battlefield yet, the lands that you are going to fetch for, but the lands, because they are part of the cost of the ability, they are off of the field, and so you can actually ramp out lands even more reliably if you have a bunch of fetch lands in your deck by activating the Surveyor Scope in response to the fetch land cracks. So this one I think is honestly pretty decent. I think honestly more decks should be running this. The question is, does it get into the S category? I'm definitely at an A because I think if you are in a mono blue like landfall deck, right, you're probably running all of the fetch lands that you can. So that makes this even better. So I think that this probably goes, would it beat out a Wayfarer's Bauble is the question. I mean, my goodness, we're talking about beating out a staple of the format by rating it above Wayfarer's Bauble, and I honestly think it has the potential to ramp you for way more than that. And if honestly, like, if you assume that only, let's assume base case, right? Base case is that you can ramp out one basic land card. If there's one green player at the table, the floor is essentially rampant growth for this card. So honestly, I think this goes towards the bottom of S, everybody. I really want to try this card out more, but I think the synergies that you have, also if you care about artifacts being on the field or artifacts going into your graveyard and reanimating them, it gets even better there with extra synergies. I think it does honestly beat out Wayfarer's Bauble because the floor is essentially rampant growth and the ceiling is 2 mana ramp for 6, which is incredible. Or I'm sorry, not 6, 3 Searchlight, because X is the number of players. For some reason I keep thinking it's 2 for each player, but you would ramp for 3 for only 2 mana, which is incredible. So what an interesting card. I think that's probably our most interesting card that we're going to review in this tier list so far. Next, we have Sword of the Animist, 2 mana, legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets ++1. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may search library for basic land card, put on battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So this is going to be essentially 4 mana rampant growth, but it can be repeatable throughout the game. But I think that Sword of the Animist, if it's done right, if it's attached to an evasive creature that just doesn't die or is not worth targeting, then this can essentially ramp you a basic from turn 3 on throughout the game because it's going to keep getting in for attacks. And I think Sword of the Animist is one of those cards that will silently win you games. And when you look at that blue player, you know, that mono blue landfall player, to say like, how the heck did they get so many lands? It's because they were swinging with Sword of the Animist every single turn. So Sword of the Animist, I think, goes probably above Wayfarer's Bauble. Does it go above Wayfarer's Bauble? It definitely is in the A category, but does it beat out the format staple Wayfarer's Bauble? I think it's right below, and I think it's probably below Reshape, because Reshape you can only pay 2 to get that first basic, so it's going to be a little bit more reliable, but you do have to also sack an artifact. I think it's going to go above Reshape. I think the Reshape, you need to sack an artifact, and so that's a little bit harder of a hoop to jump through than having just a tiny evasive creature on board. All right, next we have Terrain Generator, and this is going to be in the 2 mana slot once again because it is a land where we can pay 2 to tap it. You may put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. I think this is just great in most decks, right? I mean, if you care about ramping, you're going to run this in a land utility slot, and so I think this goes into the S tier, right above or below Surveyor Scope. We're going to put bottom of S just because there is like 0 opportunity cost to run Terrain Generator. You're just giving up an island to run it. And so for a mono blue landfall deck, honestly, I'm going to put it above that. We're going to put it even above Dowsing Dagger because I think there's just so little opportunity cost to run this. Next, we have Thaumatic Compass, which is a 2 mana artifact. You can pay 3 tap it, search library for basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, transform it, and it transforms into a land that can tap for colorless mana, but also functions as a Maze of Ith by untapping target attacking creature and an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So you can't use it on your own creature to give something pseudo vigilance, which is kind of interesting. That is a niche case of Maze of Ith. I believe if you are in your post, after the creatures have dealt damage, you can tap the Maze of Ith to then untap your creature to then use it as a blocker. Is Thaumatic Compass good? It will generate you a bunch of lands so then you can play them, but the actual land ramp part doesn't come until you control 7 or more lands, so it's going to be pretty late in the game. So I think that this probably goes towards the bottom of B, just because I think it's one of those cards where you don't want that effect necessarily at that point in time. I mean, it's great if you have a lot of, like, if your opponents have a lot of threats on board to have that Maze of its ability to save your bacon. But I mean, if you look at this as land acceleration, you're not going to get it until turn 6 or so, assuming you've ramped 1 or 2 lands throughout the game. So I think this goes probably the bottom of B, maybe top of C even. Would I even run this in a deck, right? If I would possibly run this in a mono blue landfall deck, which transforming does not count as a land entering. So honestly, I think that you'd probably cut this. It's going to be top of C, I think, for Thaumatic Compass. Next, we have Transmute Artifact, which is going to be the most expensive card on this list. I believe this costs $500 right now. 2 mana sorcery. You can sack an artifact if you do search library for an artifact card. If that card's CMC is less than or equal to the sacked artifact CMC, put it onto the battlefield, which is great if it's a land because 0 is going to be less than whatever you sack. If it's greater, you may pay X, where X is the difference. If you do put it on the battlefield, if you don't put it into its owner's graveyard, then she'll be a library. So this is going to be right in the same realm as Reshape. I think it just has to go right next to Reshape, but it's going to go below Reshape because it's going to be basically unaffordable for so many people. I believe this is on the reserve list, and if it's not, I don't know why it would be $500. So that's going to be basically the same effect as Reshape, and so it's going to be great if you treat it as land ramp or non-land ramp, which is why it goes in the A category, but points taken off for cost. Next, we have Treasure Map. Treasure Map is a 2-mana artifact. Pay 1, tap it to scry 1, put a landmark counter on it. Then if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, remove those counters, transform Treasure Map, and create 3 treasure tokens, which is cool. I always appreciate that Treasure Map gives you the treasure tokens back, so it sort of repays you for tempo. And then it transforms into Treasure Cove, which is you can tap it to add a colorless, or you can tap it, stack a treasure to draw a card. Now, what I love about this is that generally in EDH, I don't think your tempo matters a ton in turns 1 through 3, right? If you are in a board wipe heavy meta, you're generally trying not to overextend in those turns anyway. And so I think that it is perfectly fine to pay 1 into this to put landmark counters on it. And if you're in any sort of counter manipulation deck, there are bonus points there because you can then proliferate one of those counters. Now you do have to tap the ability to then be able to transform it because the transformation is part of the activation of the ability, and you get treasure tokens out of it. So I do like the fact that it essentially gives you a giant mana burst by turn like 5 or 6. Which is when you typically, so commander games, if you are able to generate a large burst of mana by turn 5 or turn 6, that is really what swings the game in your favor most of the time. And it's the big, you want to appear not threatening for turns 1 through 5. And then when you're ready to actually pop off, that's when you want all of your mana to come all at once. And so I think Treasure Map actually fits that play pattern perfectly. And the Treasure Cove itself, I think is pretty great because you can then tap it, essentially pay 1 mana to draw a card by sacking the treasure. And of course, if you're in a treasure deck, that's even better because you can just draw cards constantly, even without the treasures that Treasure Map itself makes. So I think that this is a decent option. It even gives you that scry 1 each turn to help you form that top deck manipulation. So I think this probably goes like top of B. Oh man, see, the thing is, it does give you that giant mana burst, which is what I think elevates it almost up to an A category. I'm kind of torn whether to put it bottom of A, top of B. If you care about artifacts, you probably want to run this. If you care about top deck manipulation, you might want to run this in mono blue. So I think it goes probably like bottom of A, to be honest. We're keeping the categories pretty nice here, but I think it honestly goes bottom of A just because it fits that play pattern so perfectly for what you're looking for in a commander game. Next, we have an adventure actually making it into the tier list here. This is Vantress Visions, which is a 2-mana instant adventure. Copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Then we have Virtue of Knowledge, 5-mana enchantment. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Every part of this card is just screaming value. I absolutely love this card because not only can Vantress Visions be used to actually copy a fetch land activation to ramp out an additional land, but there are tons of activated and triggered abilities throughout games of Commander, and so this is never a dead card in your hand. It's also any sort of ETB synergy that you have going on in your deck. It's going to work great with Virtue of Knowledge. Now, granted, it's a little bit of an expensive Panharmonicon type of effect, but it's going to be valuable in the late game and valuable in the early game, and you can honestly even copy your opponent's fetch lands triggers, which is why this takes it even above and beyond. I think this goes to the bottom of S just because it is so flexible. It just requires your opponent or you to have a fetch land on board, which is why it doesn't quite make it above that sort of Dowsing Dagger level, because you are a little bit less in control of when you can use it. But the fact that it is never a dead card in your hand is excellent, and I absolutely love Vantress Visions. Next, we have Walking Atlas, which is a 2-mana 1/1 construct creature. You can tap it to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, this is just a plain Jane design, very simple, which I absolutely love about it, and it's going to allow you to make an extra land drop each turn. I don't think it quite beats out Wayfarer's Bauble, and let's see, sort of the Animist can get lands out of your deck, so I think it would go maybe below the sort of the Animist, because the Walking Atlas, you need to have lands in your hand. But then again, I guess if you're in a mono blue deck, you're probably already running a bunch of cards. So I think it probably goes above Treasure Map, but below the Transmute Artifact, because you just need to have the land in your hand to continue to get value off of this, but it can basically ramp you, assuming that you are drawing a ton of cards throughout the game. And I think it is just a very inoffensive and simple card design, which I absolutely love. So I think it makes it into the A category. Next, we have Bitterthorn Nyssa's Animist, which is a 3-mana equipment artifact. It has living weapons, so when it enters, you create a 0/0 germ and attach this to it. And don't worry, it gets +1/+1, so it will not die immediately. And whenever equipped creature attacks, you may search the library for a basic land card, put it on a battlefield, tapped, then shuffle. Now, this is very similar to sort of the Animist. It is a little bit less likely to be used repeatedly because a 1/1 germ will probably die most of the time, but it is generally cheaper. That first land is cheaper because you only need to pay 3 mana for it instead of sort of the Animist's 4. So I think actually we're going to move sort of the Animist down, and I think we're going to then put Bitterthorn right above sort of the Animist, because I think that Reshape and Transmute Artifact are just so great because they're just basically unconditional land ramp. You just have to sack an artifact. Well, you do have to sack an artifact, so maybe this does go above them just because we're kind of that cost does matter within these decks. So Bitterthorn, I almost always run this over sort of the Animist because I think that first land, being able to grab that is great, and then, you know, if you can give evasion to that germ, even better. But I think that I'd rather run it over sort of the Animist just because I'm a little bit more hesitant to pay 4 mana in total instead of 3 to get that first land. So that's why it goes into the A category above Sword of the Animist. Next, we have Burnished Hart, 3-mana 2/2 elk. We can pay 3 and sack it to search the library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this is 6 total mana to ramp 2 lands, and this used to be a Commander staple like way back when in like 2014, 2015, and I remember playing this card in our like pre-con decks. I think I originally got into Commander around the Commander 2014 pre-con decks, and that was always, you know, I remember playing Burnished Hearts, and when you're in such a slow environment, you can actually ramp decently with them. I think it was in the mono red deck, which focused on like artifacts and putting artifacts into the graveyard. In 2024, this is pretty scuffed. I mean, granted, you can pay it in installments, but 6 total mana to search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them on a battlefield tapped. So honestly, like, you'd still play this on turn 3, then turn 4 you would activate it, and you wouldn't be able to use the mana until turn 5. And at that point, I'd really just rather play a Temple of the False God. So I think this probably goes below Temple of the False God if that's the case. It's just too much mana to pay for 2 basic lands that you then have to wait another turn to play. So Burnished Hart, used to love you, but you are just way too slow for 2024 Commander. Next we have Canoptek Wraith, 3 mana, 2/1 artifact Wraith. It can't be blocked, which is pretty cool for any sort of combat damage shenanigans. When Canoptek Wraith deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 3 and sack it. If you do search library for up to 2 basic land cards with the same name as a land you control, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This, I think, ranks slightly higher than Burnished Hart because it is a 2/1 that can't be blocked. You are paying a total of 6 mana, which is why it's going to rank similar to Burnished Hart. And you need to control an island to get those 2 islands out of your deck. And so I think, though, it gets extra points because if you care about dealing combat damage at all, it would definitely help you out. And so I think it just ranks straight up above Burnished Hart, but below Temple of the False God. And so I had to search my cards there to find it, but there it goes into the C category. Then we have Matzalatli, the Great Door, which is a 3 mana legendary artifact. You can tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. So nice little loot effect there. You can pay 4, transform it, activate only if there are 4 or more permanent types among cards in your graveyard. So a total of 7 mana we're paying here for a land, the core. Add X mana of any 1 color where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, which is pretty decent if you're in a self-mill type of deck, because honestly, it helps you to loot, so it enables that ability. The problem is you're paying 4 mana, and I believe when you transform a permanent, it still will enter tapped because you have to tap it to transform it, so you have to wait another turn. So I think that if you play this on turn 3, right, and then next turn you play it and pay the 4, which it's doubtful that you would have that many 4 more permanent types in your graveyard at that point, although if you've already cracked a fetch land, that would take care of the land, and then you have the loot ability, so that would be 2, so that means by turns 1 or turn 2, you would need to mill 2 additional permanent types in your graveyard, which I think is doable. Okay, so let's consider this like a turn 4 transformation. In best case scenario, we'll even say turn 5 maybe, because we'll say turn 5 average case if you need an extra turn to get those types into your graveyard. So turn 5, so that means you won't be able to use the mana until turn 6, but it gives you that burst of mana, which I guess I did use that argument for Treasure Map for being good. So you're giving up early game tempo for late game explosiveness, but you have to have permanent cards in your graveyard, which I suppose is decent. So you have to be built around it, I think. So this is, I think, not bad. I'm kind of at like bottom of B, honestly. I think you definitely need to be in a self-mill deck, and it only goes into self-mill decks. But the payoff is pretty nice, and it follows that play pattern where we want that explosive mana on in the late game. Now you're only getting the mana on turn 6, so it's kind of scuffed that way. So honestly, where would it go? I think it's below Explorer Scope. Search for Azcanta also needs the cards in your graveyard. I think it might go, let's see, because you're only getting mana until turn 6, right? I mean, your game's almost all the way over, right? If your average commander game lasts 10 turns, then I suppose that's about 60% of the way over, but you can definitely use the mana at that point in time. So it's better than Dreamscape Artist, I think, in the context of a self-mill deck. Is it better than Search for Azcanta? I think it's probably a little bit worse because Search for Azcanta only costs 2 mana and it's an enchantment, so it's less removable. Although if you care about artifacts, then this is a little bit better if you're in an artifact recursion style of deck. So Matsalotli, I think, is gonna go below Search for Azcanta. I think it makes it into B, so it's an okay option, but it is a little scuffed in terms of how long you have to wait, and we're also assuming that we do have the a number of permanents in our graveyard to be able to add a shitload of mana. So I think it's kind of middle of B. So I think that's where we will leave it. Next, we have an actually pretty spicy option that was newly released. It is Copy Land, which is a 3-mana enchantment. You may have Copy Land enter the battlefield as a copy of any land on the battlefield except instant enchantment in addition to its other types. Boy, does it feel nice to copy somebody's Field of the Dead. Oh boy, this is awesome. Or, if they've got their own Ancient Tomb or Terrain Generator or Temple of the False God, I think that this is awesome. And if you even have one of your own lands that you've transformed, like a Dowsing Dagger or a anything like that, then this gets even better. So the fact that this is always a 3-mana, at least ramp for 1, is the floor, and the ceiling is you get the best land on the battlefield, a Glacial Chasm or something crazy like that. This definitely makes it into the S category. I think it probably makes it above Dowsing Dagger. I think right above Dowsing Dagger, but below Terrain Generator, just because Terrain Generator once again has like 0 opportunity cost for running. Copy Land is going to be a 3-mana spell that can just always be the best land on the battlefield, so I think that it is absolutely excellent, and it definitely deserves to be in almost every blue deck. And up next, we have Min Wily Illusionist, 3-mana 1/3 Gnome Wizard. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token. With this creature gets +1/+0 for each other illusion you control. And then whenever an illusion you control dies, you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield. So if we can play this on turn 3, untap, next turn we go to turn 4, and if we can then draw a second card to create the token, and then we have a way to sack the token. Magical Christmas Land, we have Skull Clamp on the battlefield. We can then have that illusion die, and then because our land is CMC 0, we can put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. So we also need a land in our hand for this to work. That is so many hoops to jump through, and you'd have to be in some sort of aristocrat style of build, which in mono blue I don't really think is a thing, although there are a few sack outlets you can run: Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar, the Mill Altar, which I forget at the moment. So I think this goes top of C, because technically it is okay for what it does. It's just, as a land ramp spell, it is pretty scuffed. So maybe that's the definition actually of our CCLI category. Card is excellent, but scuffed as land ramp. I wouldn't say this card is excellent per se, so maybe it goes towards the bottom of Sea Sailor, but it is a card that if you jump through enough hoops, it will pay you off. So I think it goes into Sea Sailor. Next, we have Mitotic Manipulation, which is a 3-mana sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards on the battlefield if it has the same name as a permanent you control. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So this is definitely going to get us a land. And then the neat thing about this is that if you don't hit the land right, you are probably going to be super mana screwed. And so you are super happy to put 7 cards that are non-lands onto the bottom of your library. Will this always get you a land? No, but I would say it will get you a land 90% of the time, just, pulling math out of my rear end here. So I think this this is pretty good. This is a pretty reliable land ramp. You need to have islands, right? So you need to build around it. I think it's better than Bitterthorn, but maybe worse than Wayfarer's Bauble, just because Wayfarer's Bauble will always get you the land every time. Bitterthorn, you do have to wait for it, and so I think this goes right between Wayfarer's Bauble and Bitterthorn, because it allows you to get the land on the battlefield right away. Next, we have Navigation Orb, 3-mana artifact. You can pay 2 and sack it to search the library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gate cards. Reveal those cards, put one on the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 mana to draw a land and put one on the battlefield tapped is awful. This one is going into the C category, and we are going to throw this probably, I'm thinking probably below Temple of the False God, but above Canoptek Wraith. Next, we have Pendant of Prosperity, 3 mana artifact. It enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. 2 mana tap, draw a card, then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Pendant of Prosperity's owner draws a card, then that player may put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. So this is really interesting because you are really only paying 3 mana to then draw a card and drop a land, assuming that your opponent activates this. Now, if we assume that we can politic this card to ensure an activation from it, I think that this is not bad, and this definitely plays well into allyships within Commander because it doesn't get passed around, right? It always stays under that same opponent's control, and so you can definitely negotiate this. So if you look at it as 3 mana repeatable explore, I think this is actually pretty decent, right? I mean, the opponent is going to get the advantage out of it, right? But I think that we can probably politic this into, you know, you put it under the control of the player who is behind the most, and so you can sort of mitigate the opponent's advantage a little bit. And so I think that Pendant of Prosperity actually looks a lot better, or probably plays a lot better than it looks. So I think it doesn't quite make it into the A category because we are giving away a lot of advantage, but I think this probably makes it into the top of B just because I really love the card advantage that it gives you as well. So I think this goes into top of B category. Next, we have Realmbreaker, the Invasion Tree, 3 mana artifact, legendary. You can pay 2, tap it, target opponent mills 3 cards, put a land card from their graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control. It gains if this land would leave, exile it instead. And then you can pay 10 and sack it to search the library for any number of Praetor cards, put them on the battlefield, then shuffle. We're going to assume we're not building around the Praetor ability. So this is going to be 5 mana, but we get our opponent's best land out of their graveyard. So 5 mana is a lot, right? So I think that immediately disqualifies it from the A category. You can pay it in installments, so points there. So if we assume we drop this on turn 3 and then turn 4 we ramp out a land, and enters tapped, so we can't even use it until turn 5. So it's pretty slow. I think this is going towards possibly top of C. I just think it's a little bit too slow for what we're getting here, but would it beat out Thaumatic Compass? I think that Thaumatic Compass is probably a little bit better than this. I'd rather get the super slowness from Thaumatic Compass and get the Maze of Ith, I believe, rather than use the Realmbreaker. Although, I mean, we can possibly get like a Field of the Dead out of somebody's graveyard, but what are the chances of that really happening? So I think this maybe goes just below Thaumatic Compass, and we'll call it a day with Realmbreaker, the Invasion Tree. Next, we have Sword of Hearth and Home, 3 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from green and from white. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1, target creature you own, then search the library for a basic land card. Put both cards onto the battlefield under your control, untapped, I might add, then shuffle. So the problem with Sword of Hearth and Home is that it costs 5 mana for this effect. Now, you're probably not running this unless you're in a Flicker deck, and there are some variants of mono blue Flicker, so it's not bad in that context, and it does give protection from green and from white, so you're protected from one of the more commonly common colors for removal spells. So I think it gets points there. It's just a little bit slow, and so I think that if you are in a Flicker deck, you probably play this, but otherwise not. And so I'm just trying to think, should this go into the Sea Sailor category or towards maybe the bottom of B, or maybe the middle of B, in fact. It's just that 5 mana, if you look at it from a land ramp slot perspective, 5 mana is a lot. And so I think this is going to go in our Sea Sailor category because we probably are playing it for the flicker effect. 5 mana gets you to the sea category, but I just feel like Sword of Hearth and Home does so much more. And so that's why I think we probably want to put it, maybe in the middle of our Sea Sailor category, more as a flicker type of effect. Then we have the Everflowing Well, which is a legendary artifact. When ETBs mill 2 cards, then draw 2 cards. So 3 mana mill 2, draw 2, not bad if you're in a self-milled deck. Descend 8 at the beginning of your upkeep. If there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, transform it, and it transforms into a land that taps for 1. Whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by the Myriad Pools, up to 1 other target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. I absolutely love the Everflowing Well in any sort of self-mill deck because you are immediately getting the value of the turn it comes down, and the land ramp option is gravy on top of that. So I know I'm sort of looking outside the lens of a land ramp spell here, but truly 3 mana mill 2, draw 2 is great because in a self-mill deck, the milling 2 you basically treat as card draw if you're playing out of your graveyard, and so it's really 3 mana draw 4, kind of sort of. And then let's see, so to meet the Descend 8 criteria, we need to have 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, which can be a little bit more difficult. So if we mill 2, right, so we've already got 2 of the 8 taken care of, assuming that those are permanent cards, and then we need to make 6 more cards. So let's say we can't flip this until turn 5. In turn 5, we get the land, which is not, it's kind of slow, but it's not as bad as like turn 6, for example. And then you get the extra bonus of the permanent spell, and you get the copy effect. So I think that this makes it into probably the Sea Sailor category, the top of Sea Sailor category, because you're probably playing this more for the milling and drawing. But I think that that's the vast majority of this value, but it is even better if you can turn it into a land ramp spell. So does it go into Sea Sailor, or do we put it into a different category here? I think that, let's see, I think it honestly would make it into in a vacuum, perhaps. You need permanent cards, which you're not, in a vacuum, you're not always going to have. So I think you need to be both in a self-mill deck that is heavy on permanent cards, and you are probably playing this more for mill to draw 2. So I think this is going to go into the top of Sea Sailor, probably above the Mycosynth Gardens. And then we have Vexing Puzzlebox, 3 mana artifact. Whenever you roll 1 or more dice, put a number of charge counters on Vexing Puzzlebox equal to the result. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, and then you can roll a d20, and then you can tap to remove 100 charge counters from Vexing Puzzlebox. Search your library for an artifact card, put that card on the battlefield, then shuffle. Technically, this can search out a land, but you are probably not going to be doing that. And so this is a classic example into the Sea Sailor category because technically it is land ramp, but you are going to be playing this for much more than that. And so it goes into our Sea Sailor category. And up next, we have another spicy tutor to battlefield effect, which I absolutely love. I play this in many decks. Whir of Invention, X blue, instant with improvise. Search your library for an artifact card with CMC X or less, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Of course, we can grab a land for only 3 mana and ramp that out untapped. So that is pretty excellent. So immediately, I think it beats out Wayfarer's Bauble. And I think this is honestly as good as Copy Land, maybe a little bit less. So I think this actually goes into the S category because it's basically an unrestricted 3 mana ramp out any land untapped. So that is absolutely awesome, and it's going to go in the staple category. Next, we have Abstruse Archaic, 4 mana 3/4 Avatar with Vigilance. You can pay 1, tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability you control from a colorless source. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this is, once again, we can copy our fetch land triggers, but this is going to be a boatload of mana, and it has to be from a colorless source, so you probably can't use this with your other effects. Would you ever put this into a real commander deck? I don't think so, and so this probably goes below our Burnished Hart right there in the cuttable category. Next we have Annex, 4 mana enchantment aura. You enchant land and you control enchanted land. Now this is again breaking our rules just a little bit because this does not put lands onto the battlefield to trigger landfall. However, it does put another land onto the battlefield under your control, or rather in your possession, I should say. And this grabs any land off of the field. So is this as good as copy land? Well, it's 1 mana more, so I think that automatically makes it a little bit worse. And it does function as land removal as well, which I think is where it gets a little bit more bonus points as well. Annex, I can't believe more people don't play this. I think this is actually pretty decent. Would you pay 4 mana to ramp a land though, and also steal your opponent's best land? I mean, you could grab a bounce land, which would make it even better. You could grab a, you probably wouldn't want to grab like a strip mine or something that they can activate at any time. But I think that Annex, you can really just grab the best land off the battlefield. So honestly, I feel like this makes it into the S category, because I'm just thinking like if you nab any sort of land that produces 2 or more mana, then this is incredibly good and it removes it at the same time. So I think that Annex actually goes perhaps slightly above Virtue of Knowledge because it's pretty much never going to be a dead card. I know Virtue of Knowledge is pretty much never dead either, but Annex is just always going to have a target straight up, and so I think it goes into the S category. Then we have Conqueror's Galleon, 4-mana artifact vehicle. When it attacks, exile it at the end of combat, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. And it should be noted too, when the card returns, it returns untapped because it's exiled and returning. It has crew 4, so you can tap any number of creatures you control, total power 4 or more, to make it into an artifact creature until end of turn. And it has power 2, toughness 10, which is a very beefy ship. And it transforms into a land that taps for 1 colorless, and we can pay 2, tap it, draw a card, then discard a card. Pay 4, tap it to draw a card, pay 6, tap it, return target card from my graveyard to your hand. This is an interesting choice. It's pretty slow, but I think that this is probably decently consistent. So you essentially need to play on turn 4. Next turn, it can attack. And you need to have at least total power on board of 4, which I think is easy. So if you consider the fact that you might just crew it with a creature you didn't want to attack with anyway, that's maybe a 4/4, or perhaps you have 4/1/1s, it will definitely survive combat, although I don't think it really, oh, I guess it says exile it at end of combat, so it is a delayed trigger, so it does need to survive combat. So the 2/10 will definitely make it through combat, and then you get the land, so the land then comes in on turn 5 still, and so you can use it. So I think that this is not a bad option. I mean, it is a little scuffed, and so I think it is in the B tier just because you really don't get the extra land until turn 5. The question is, does it beat out something like a Dreamscape Artist? And I think that it probably no, Dreamscape Artist requires total format of investment, and this one you do need the creature on the battlefield. I think we'll put this in bottom of B. I think it's a little slow for what it does, but because it has the 10 toughness, it generally can survive the combat, and you get a little bit of extra utility there. But we'll put it in bottom of B. And yeah, you know, if you have extra synergies for artifacts or vehicles, then that's even better. Next up, we have Golden Guardian, a 4-mana 4/4 artifact creature golem with Defender. You can pay 2. It fights another target creature you control. So we're killing our own creatures now, folks. This is as good as it gets. When a Golden Guardian dies this turn, return it to the battlefield transformed under your control, and it transforms into Goldforge Garrison. You can tap it to add 2 mana of any one color to your mana pool, and you can pay 4, tap it to create a 4/4. Okay, so we need to pay 4 and then 2, so a total of 6 mana to then have a chance to turn it into a 2-mana producer. And we need to have a creature that will be more than 4 power and 4 toughness so that it both survives, so we don't actually kill our own creature, and then we have the Golden Guardian die. So I think this very clearly goes below the Burnished Hart and below probably the Abstruse Archaic, because I'd rather honestly activate the Abstruse Archaic on a fetch land. So I think this definitely goes probably above the Azor's Gate. No, we're going to put it below the Azor's Gateway into the C tier. Okay, folks, we're still almost there. Horizon of Progress, you can, I'm just going to read the part that matters here. You can pay 3 mana, tap it. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, which is pretty awesome. And of course it says tap, pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. So it's a nice reflecting pool type of effect. And you can even cycle it, pay 1 tap to sack and draw a card. I think this goes straight into our S category because like Terrain Generator, there is just 0 opportunity cost to play this. And so because it also color fixes you, I think that it goes above the Terrain Generator. Next, we have Lithoform Engine, 4 mana legendary artifact. We could pay 2 to tap it and tap a copy target activator triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, and then we could pay 3 tap it, copy target instant sorcery spell you control. Pay 4 tap it, copy target permanent spell you control. So this is, I think, a prime candidate for Sea Sailor because Lithoform Engine is just great in most decks. It's inefficient. I will say that. It is inefficient for what it does, but the flexibility that it provides is pretty great, and you can incidentally use it for land ramp at a heavy cost of a total of 6 mana. So this will definitely make it into the Sea Sailor category right below the Mycosynth Gardens. Then we have a Mimeofacture, 4 mana sorcery with Replicate for 4 mana. When you play the spell, copy for each time you pay to replicate cost. You may choose new targets for the copies. Choose target permanent and opponent control. Search that player's library for a card with the same name and put it on a play under your control. Then that player shuffles his or her library. So this is going to be a 4 mana grab a land that your opponent controls, which is not necessarily color fixing for you. It's probably going to be a land that you will end up tapping for colorless or use it for a colorless casting cost. And so I think this immediately disqualifies it for the B category at 4 mana. Would it actually make it into B? I think it might actually make it into B, probably above Conqueror's Galleon, because we have to jump through more hoops for the Conqueror's Galleon than Mimeofacture. And so I think for that reason, we are going to put it perhaps above the Dreamscape Artist, I'm thinking. Although Dreamscape Artist is repeatable, maybe we put it just right above the Conqueror's Galleon, I think. Yeah, that looks good. Then we have O'Hare Pakpatik, Deepest Epic, 4 mana 4/3 flyer. When you cast an instant sorcery spell from your hand, it gains Rebound. Then when this creature dies, return battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control with 3 time counters on it, and transforms into a land. Add a blue, remove a time counter from it, and then you can pay 3 tap it to transform it back into the creature, but activate only if it has no time counters on it. So you need a way to kill this creature. I think that you're probably playing this not for the land ramp necessarily, although if you reliably can kill it, I think it's somewhat decent as land ramp. Again, 4 mana for 1 land is pretty scuffed in 2024 Commander. So for that reason, I think this will probably make it into the Sea Sailor category, where you can use this as land ramp if you are in an aristocrat style of deck, and we'll put it right below the Sword of Hearth and Home. Next, we have Orvar the All Form, 4 mana 3/3 shapeshifter with Changeling. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. Whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. So Orvar decks are combo machines, and I actually have an Orvar deck, and actually one of the prime strategies for Orvar on the field is to copy your lands. You need to be able to target lands, which is the problem, and not a lot of decks have the ability to target lands reliably, and so I think you definitely need to build around it, and I think Orvar probably makes it into the Sea Sailor category, where it is a good card. It's just, and you can ramp with it, it's just that you need a heavy build around, and you're obviously not playing it for the ramp effect itself. So we'll put Orvar right above the Lithoform Engine and call it a day with Orvar. Next, we have Primal Amulet, a 4-mana artifact. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. What if you cast an instant sorcery spell, put a charge counter on it, then if there are 4 more charge counters on it, you may remove those counters and transform it. And it taps for Primal Wellspring as a land that taps, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. When that mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy that spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So this is going to be fit into a Spellslinger deck, and I will say the land itself is pretty nice. Do you run this in a vacuum though? I mean, would you run it for the ramp aspect itself? You really need to be in a heavy Spellslinger deck. And so, you know, but even in a Spellslinger deck, which I've experimented with this in both my, I believe it's not Melik, it's the Experience Counter Instant Sorcery card. I'll have it on the screen. I've ran it in that and also in Veyran, which is more of a Spellslinger type of deck where you have a lot of cantrips. I've just found that Primal Amulet is really awkward because it's a cost reducer, and in decks where you're casting a lot of instants and sorceries, to ratchet up those counters really quick, you want to be casting 1 mana instants and sorceries. And so I think that this is, in a Spellslinger deck, it's decent. It might not even make the cut. It's sort of on the fringe. It's maybe your 101st or 102nd card. The land itself is nice. It's just getting to the land that's the problem. So like in a vacuum, right? If you're not dedicated to instants and sorceries, you're probably going to flip this on turn 5, and then even then you would be able to use it the next turn. So that's assuming you can flip it on turn 5. So I think you might not even be able to use it till turn 6 potentially, maybe average case. So turn 6, I think that puts it probably into the I kind of want to put it into the Sea Sailor category. It's really more of a ramp option more than anything. I mean, I know a lot of these are like not dedicated ramp spells, and this is one that just technically ramps. But I mean, the cost reducer effect is nice. So I think we'll put it in Sea Sailor. I think right below Orvar. Next, we have Scampering Surveyor, 4-mana 3/2 artifact creature gnome. When it ETBs, search the library for a basic land card or cave card, put it on battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This is a no strings attached ramp for 4 mana, which I think immediately gets it into the B category. The question is it better than Mimeofacture? Because Mimeofacture is basically the same thing, but for a colorless land. Although Scampering Surveyor will get you a land of the color of your choice. I think it's probably better than Dreamscape Artist, to be honest. Although, let me think here, because it's just an unconditional turn. Well, but it's turn 4, right? I mean, it's going to be turn 4 by the time we activate this. So I think that there needs to be... Dreamscape, I guess, depends on if you're evaluating it in a discard deck or in a vacuum, because I'd probably rate it over Scampering Surveyor in a discard deck. So I think we'll maybe put Scampering Surveyor right above Retraced Image, and we can just put it into our B category here. Hey folks, Tier List Maker actually crashed on me, so I had to rebuild this entire tier list from scratch. And so if there are any formatting changes, I apologize. We're just sort of working with what we have here, given the fragility of Tier List Maker. I'm definitely not a fan of this website. Next, we have Scaretiller, which, again, one of the unfortunate bugs of Tier List Maker is that for some reason this won't pick up the Scaretiller image off of my computer, and I just want to leave it as is, given how fragile the website is. So I will edit Scaretiller in post and Photoshop it into the final tier list page or image. Scaretiller is a 4-mana 1/4 artifact creature scarecrow. Whenever it becomes tapped, choose one. You may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped, or return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Now, the problem with Scaretiller is that it is very slow and is not likely to survive combat, because it is going to be swinging in on turn 5, and a 1/4 surviving combat on turn 5 is very unlikely. And then after that, we only get to use the land by turn 6, and so I think that immediately puts it into the C cuttable category for being very slow. Next, we have Solemn Simulacrum. Sad Robot is, of course, a staple of the format. 4 mana 2/2. When it ETBs, you may search library for a basic land card, put a card on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. When it dies, you may draw a card. Now, I think this is very similar tiering to Scampering Surveyor, but it does draw us the extra card. Scampering Surveyor, of course, can get us a gate card if we care about that, but I think the card advantage in most decks is going to be more valuable, and so for that reason, it goes slightly above Scampering Surveyor. Next, we have Talon Gates of Madara, which is a land. When ETBs, up to 1 target creature phases out, which is a great land to put into any deck, but there's a bonus here that you can pay 4 mana to put it from our hand onto the battlefield. So we can actually ramp this land onto the battlefield by paying 4 mana at any time, which is pretty awesome. And I think that this card is just straight up excellent. Most of the time you're going to be using it for the protection aspect, but the extra land does count as being ramped, and it has such a little opportunity cost. And so if I were to put this into S tier, it would probably be perhaps under Terrain Generator, but I'm honestly thinking to put it in the C Sailor category because it honestly is excellent, but we probably wouldn't want to treat it as like a traditional ramp card, but because there's such little opportunity cost, I think we're just going to put it into S tier under Terrain Generator. Next, we have Thran Temporal Gateway, 4 mana legendary artifact. We can pay 4 and tap it. You may put a historic permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. Of course, for this to be a land ramp, we would need an artifact legendary or saga land. And so for that reason, we are going to put it in the C Sailor category because this is a pretty great card that can put some amazing creatures into play, but we are obviously not going to use it as a land ramp. And so for that reason, it's going below Orvar. Next, we have Urza's Cave, a recent card from Modern Horizons 3. We can tap it to add a colorless, or we can pay 3 and tap it, sack it, to search a library for a land card, put it on if it tapped, and then shuffle. This, of course, can grab us Ancient Tomb, Temple of the False God, Urza's Saga, any of those great lands. And so Urza's Cave, I think, is in the 4 CMC slot because it's going to cost us 3 colorless and then the actual tapping of the land itself. So I think then it would go into probably the S category because once again, there is just like 0 opportunity cost for running these types of lands. So I think it's going to go above Talon Gates because we can search for any land. Next, we have Dream Leash, which is a 5 mana aura enchant permanent. You may play Dream Leash only on a tapped permanent and you control enchanted permanent. This is an interesting card. Obviously, you would not use it as a land ramp, so I don't think it would make it into the C Sailor category. The question is, would you use it to steal a tapped permanent? I don't think most of the time you would because there are just better effects like this. For example, the reserve list aura that untaps 5 lands, I'd probably run first and foremost. So I would probably put this at the like bottom of C Sailor. No, not even. It's not even that excellent. We're just going to put this straight into C category, probably above the Hithlain Rope because I just would never run the Hithlain Rope. Next, we have Kuldotha Forgemaster. Again, technically a ramp card. 5 mana, 3/5 artifact creature construct. We can tap it, sack 3 artifacts to search a library for an artifact card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Of course, this being a famous combo card, and this is going to be top of C Sailor because it is amazing at what it does, and it technically can grab lands. And then next, we're really making the stretch here, ladies and gentlemen. As you can tell, as we go up the mana curve, these are more and more scuffed as ramp. Tezzeret the Seeker is a planeswalker for 5 mana. It enters with 4 loyalty, and I'm just going to read the 1 ability, -X, search a library for an artifact card with converting mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle, and of course we can grab a ramp card, or I'm sorry, an artifact land. Now, would we ever see this, would we to untap with this after a go-around around the table, I think it would get taken out immediately. And so, of course, Tezzeret is going to be right below Kuldotha. It is excellent at what it does, but not at ramping, although it technically can ramp too. Confiscate is our next card here. 6 mana enchanted aura, enchant permanent. You control enchanted permanent. I think this can go straight into the C category. Paying 6 mana to steal a permanent is going to be pretty scuffed, and so we're going to go below Dream Leash there on the C category. In Bolus's Clutches, 6 mana aura. Enchant permanent, you control enchanted permanent. Enchanted permanent is a legendary, so that's going to go right by the confiscate here. Next, we have Planar Bridge, 6 mana legendary artifact. We can pay 8 to search your library for a permanent card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Oh my god, this is bad, even if you're not grabbing a land, although if you pay 8 mana to grab a land, what are you doing? So this goes in the bottom of C, below the Hithlain Rope, ladies and gentlemen. Next, we have Volition Reigns, 6 mana enchant permanent. When you ETBs, if enchanted permanent is tapped, untap it, you control enchanted permanent. This goes right with the rest of the control magic type of effects above Dream Leash because it gets the untap effect. Then we have Lay Claim, 7 mana enchant permanent. You control enchanted permanent, so we can steal a land off our opponent's boards. Same exact reason, but it costs 7 mana, so we're going to put it right above Hithlain Rope there. Next, we have Take Possession, which is going to be split second for 7 mana. Boy, we can sure ramp for 7 mana. Enchant permanent, you control enchanted permanent. That's going to go right below Lay Claim. And then finally, we have Urza Saga, which I added at the last moment, just remembering that you can technically ramp off of Urza Saga. So the way that Urza Saga works is that on the Chapter 3 trigger, after your draw, you can then tap the Urza Saga for mana. It will then be sacrificed, and you're still floating that colorless. Then you can go put a Soul Ring into play, and that can tap for 2 mana. So technically, Urza Saga can generate you 3 mana and ramp you into a Soul Ring later on in the game, and I think that actually goes straight up above, well, perhaps above Ancient Tomb. Ancient Tomb is just so good either way. I think we go slightly below Ancient Tomb. I think it goes second. So again, just like no opportunity cost, and it can create that construct for us. So that is the tier list, ladies and gentlemen. This was a lot of cards to review. Boy, am I going to have to cut this down in the future. As we go through here, are there any that we would rearrange? And let's see, so we've got mostly lands here in the top, which I think makes sense just because, again, there's just 0 opportunity cost to run these. You can just run these in any deck in place of an island and have some sort of ramp built into your deck. Then we've got the copy lands. So these are going to be all of the 2 or 3 mana effects. Annex here coming in at 4 mana that will allow you to generate a land. Visions of Knowledge also just for the versatility it provides. Wayfarer's Bauble is 3 mana, enters tapped, but well, you have to wait the next turn to use it here. And then these are going to be a lot of 3 and 4 mana, grabs a land and enters tapped. Reshape and the Transmute Artifact, of course, we have to sack an artifact to get those effects. So would I rearrange any in the S or A tier here? I think Copyland is perfect. Whir of Invention. I mean, these are both the same, really. I mean, Whir has extra flexibility, but Copyland can always get the best land on the battlefield. Dowsing Dagger is pretty good. Surveyor's Scope, Annex. I think these all are pretty much where I would keep them. Wayfarer's Bauble is just so reliable, and you can pay it in increments, so I think we're going to keep that there. Bitterthorn and Sword are pretty even, and then the artifact sack effects I think are decent where they are. Maybe I'd actually move these up a little bit just because I think it's very cheap to get these onto the battlefield. I think that sacking artifact is a lower hoop to jump through than I initially anticipated, but Walking Atlas, you do need a land in your hand, so I think it's below Sword and Bitterthorn, and then Treasure Map is bottom bottom of A there. So our mid-tier category here, Pendant, Scorched Ruins, Explorer's Scope, I think that's about right. Search for Azcantas in specific decks, Mat, Salanti, also Dreamscape. So these need to be in like specific graveyard filling decks. Then we've got Solemn at the mid B tier, which I think is about right because 4 mana is pretty slow in Commander. 4 mana as well for Scampering Surveyor. Then we've got, I think I would leave all of these as well. The weird one out of the mix is Retraced Image because it is so efficient at only 1 mana, but it is a card itself, right? So it doesn't really generate a land out of the deck. I guess, would it be kind of similar to Walking Atlas really? Because I guess it's just a faster version of Walking Atlas now that I sort of think about it. So let's actually move Retraced Image to bottom of A. I'm thinking it makes a huge, no, I think we need to move Walking Atlas perhaps down. Pendant of Prosperity, Retraced Image. The thing is, Retraced Image is a one-time effect, and that's why a Walking Atlas is so much higher. I think we can keep that. Maybe we just move Retraced Image up in the B category, maybe below Explorer's Scope. I think that's probably pretty decent. Then we've got our 4 mana rampers here. And of course, Conqueror's Galleon has a bit of a requirement to have crew 4. And then we've got our C tier, which I'm not going to pay too much attention to the ordering of these. Of course, we have our 6 mana to ramp out a land here with Canoptek Wraith and Burnished Hart. And then let's see, I think the rest of these are 6 mana or more. And so really the top of C, so we have Thaumatic Compass, so that's probably the most efficient, but the land comes in the latest. Realmbreaker is going to cost 5 mana to ramp for 1. Adric is going to be pretty niche. Temple, honestly, I'm kind of at, I think I want to move Temple to the top of C if I'm being honest, because I think that this is a decent land to include as long as you are in a dedicated landfall deck. So we'll move that to the top of C, and then our really niche cards, Kuldotha, Tezzeret, are great in their respective artifact decks. And of course we have the Everflowing Well, which is great in a self-milled deck. Mycosynth Gardens is whatever Orvar you need to build around it to target your lands, but it's great when you do. So let's see, maybe we move, actually I think the rest of these are probably pretty good. Thran Temporal Gateway to put big fatties on the field. I think Primal Amulet is probably above Thran Temporal Gateway because it's just a big mana investment, whereas Primal Amulet is going to really help smooth out the spell casts. Maybe it's actually above Orvar because there's less of a deck building restriction. We'll actually do that. Lithoform I think is more flexible and better than Orvar. Sort of Hearth and Home I think we can put above Orvar again because it's less, it requires less of a build around. This fella, Ogier Patik, requires a sack outlet to ramp, but he's good regardless. So I think we'll maybe just put him above Orvar as well, because there's a bit of a less build around, more of a spell slinger type of commander there. Min is going to require a lot of hoops to jump through, and then we have Vexing Puzzlebox, which is more of like a meme card from a ramp perspective. So I think that is our final tier list, ladies and gentlemen. We can wrap up the video there. Thank you all for watching. If you have any recommendations, leave them in the comment below, and I will be sure to respond with a grading S, A, B, or C, or our jank category C seller here. So anyway, if you're still watching at this point in the video, let me know what your favorite snack is. I'd be curious to know what you like to snack on. If you are a gamer bringing your few decks to the LGS, what do you bring so that you are not getting food on people's cards, but something that's nice and delicious to munch on during a nice Sunday night Commander night. With that, I will wrap up the video. Thank you all for watching. Leave a like on the video. Subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. I release Magic videos regularly, so by subscribing, you can keep up to date with all of that. And hopefully, I will see you all in the next tier list. Have a great day, everybody.